The steady beeping of the heart monitor had become the soundtrack to my life. It was a constant, electronic reminder that I was alive. But only just 7 days. For an entire week. I had been a resident of room 407 at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center, connected to wires that felt more like chains and life-saving equipment. I adjusted my pillow for the 10th time that morning, trying to find a position that would ease the dull, persistent pressure in my chest. Outside my window, Los Angeles buzzed with life. The October sun streamed through the glass, casting golden stripes across the sterile, white linoleum floor. I watched the people on the sidewalk below, hurried executives clutching briefcases, mothers pushing strollers, teenagers laughing loudly as they walked in a tight, inseparable group. Life was happening down there. A life I was now watching from a great and lonely distance. Mrs. Moore. Nurse Patricia knocked gently on the door frame, her voice a welcome note of warmth in the clinical symphony. How are we feeling this morning? I managed a weak smile, like I'm starring in a medical drama nobody wants to watch. Patricia chuckled as she checked the foredrip, her movements efficient and kind. Well, your sense of humor is still intact. That's a good sign. Dr. Matthews will be making his rounds in about an hour. After she left, the silence returned, punctuated only by the beep, beep, beep of the machine beside me. I reached for the small, dark wooden box on my bedside table. Inside were dozens of handwritten notes from my father, Howard Moore, who had passed away 8 months earlier. I'd been carrying them with me everywhere since his funeral, reading them whenever I needed a dose of his strength, his unwavering belief in me. I carefully unfolded a familiar piece of paper, the creases soft from countless readings. Bella, remember that your worth isn't measured by what others think of you, but by how you treat yourself when no one is watching. You are stronger than you know, braver than you feel, and more loved than you could ever imagine. Love. Dad. The note trembled in my hands. If only he could see me now. 32 years old, with a heart that was failing, and a husband who barely visited. Would he still think I was strong? The door opened without a knock. Richard Moore stepped in, his 6-foot frame filling the doorway. At 36, he still turned heads with his dark hair and sharp jawline. But I had learned to see past the handsome surface to the cold, hard structure beneath. His cologne, an expensive kind he'd started wearing about 6 months ago, announced his presence before he even spoke. Isabella. His voice was flat, businesslike. It held no warmth, no concern. It was the voice of a man fulfilling an obligation. Richard. I didn't look up from my father's note. You're early today. I have a meeting at 3. He glanced at his Rolex, another recent and expensive addition to his wardrobe. How are you feeling? The question sounded rehearsed, like something he practiced in the elevator on the way up. I finally met his eyes, searching for even a flicker of the man I had married 5 years ago. The man who used to bring me coffee in bed on Sunday mornings. Who would hold me during thunderstorms because he knew they scared me. Who had promised, in front of all our friends and family, to love me in sickness and in health. That man was gone. I'm tired. Richard. The doctors say my heart is. Yeah. I know what they said. He cut me off, checking his phone for notifications. Look. I need to talk to you about some practical things. The mortgage payment is due next week, and with you not working, my chest tightened. And this time, it wasn't from my condition. Practical things. Money. Isabella. Bills. Real life doesn't stop just because you're in here. I folded my father's note carefully, my hands shaking slightly. Whether it was from the medication or the raw emotion, I couldn't tell. I placed it back in the wooden box, closing the lid with a soft click. My insurance covers most of this, I said quietly. And we have savings. We had savings. He corrected, moving to the window and turning his back to me. Medical bills add up fast. I'm just saying we need to be realistic about what comes next. The beeping from the heart monitor seemed to quicken its pace. I closed my eyes, remembering another one of my father's notes. One he'd written after a business deal went bad. When someone shows you who they really are, Bella, believe them the first time. A gentle knock on the door frame interrupted the icy tension. William Carter, my father's longtime friend and attorney, appeared in the doorway. At 68, William had a full head of silver hair and kind eyes that crinkled at the corners. Behind wire-rimmed glasses, he carried a worn leather briefcase and wore the expression of someone who had important, but not unwelcome, business. Isabella. Dear. William's voice was warm, A comforting blanket in a cold room. Everything Richards wasn't. I hope I'm not interrupting. William. My face lit up with a genuine smile for the first time all day. Of course not. Please. Come in. Richard turned from the window, his expression shifting into a forced, polite smile. He extended his hand. Mr. Carter. Good to see you. William shook his hand briefly, his eyes never leaving my face. I brought you some things from your father's house. I was clearing out his study and thought you might want them while you're recovering. He pulled out a small, leather-bound photo album and another wooden box, slightly larger than the one on my bedside table. He left specific instructions that you should have these. My heart fluttered. It wasn't the dangerous flutter of my condition, but a flicker of connection to my father. He always did plan ahead. Yes, he did, William said meaningfully, his eyes flicking toward Richard for a brief second. In more ways than you know. Richard checked his phone again, his thumb swiping impatiently across the screen. Well, this is all very touching, but I really do need to. Actually, Richard, William interrupted, his tone shifting from gentle to something firmer, more professional. I'm glad you're here. There are some estate matters we'll need to discuss soon. All three of us. Something flickered across Richard's face. Surprise. Maybe concern. Quickly masked by his usual confidence. Estate matters? Howard's will was settled months ago. William smiled, but the smile didn't quite reach his kind eyes. Not everything was settled, I'm afraid. But that's a conversation for another day. When Isabella is feeling stronger. The room fell silent again, except for the persistent beeping of the machines monitoring my fragile life. I sensed an undercurrent I couldn't quite grasp. Like the heavy, still air just before a thunderstorm. Richard's phone buzzed with an incoming text. He read it quickly, and his expression shifted to something almost eager. Relieved. I have to go, he announced, already moving toward the door. That meeting got moved up. Of course it did. I whispered to myself, but he was already gone, his expensive cologne trailing behind him like a ghost. William sat in the chair Richard had just vacated. His presence immediately filled the room with a sense of safety and warmth. How are you really doing, dear? I looked at this man who had been like an uncle to me my entire life, who had held my hand at my father's funeral, who was one of the few people left in the world who truly knew me. The wall I had been holding up all morning began to crumble. I'm scared, William, I confessed, my voice trembling. And not just about my heart, about everything. He reached over and patted my hand gently, his touch firm and reassuring. Your father used to say that sometimes we have to go through the storm to appreciate the sunshine. I'm not sure I'm strong enough for much more of a storm. William's eyes twinkled with something that looked almost like a secret he was happy to keep. Oh, my dear Isabella, he said, his voice low and full of conviction. You're stronger than you know, and you're about to discover just how much your father believed in that strength. As if on cue, the heart monitor's frantic rhythm steadied, settling into a calm, regular beat, and for the first time in days, I felt like I could breathe just a little bit easier. 3 days had passed since William's mysterious visit. I found myself replaying his words during the long, quiet hours between medical rounds and sleepless nights. You're stronger than you know, and you're about to discover just how much your father believed in that strength. The phrase echoed in my mind as I watched the 4 drips slowly feed medication into my bloodstream. It felt like a promise. But a promise of what? I couldn't yet imagine. It was Tuesday afternoon when everything changed. The sound of laughter in the hallway caught my attention first. It was bright, feminine, and carefree, a sound so out of place in a cardiac wing that it felt like a violation. I turned my head toward the door just as Richard appeared. But this time, he wasn't alone. The girl beside him couldn't have been older than 21. She had platinum blonde hair that caught the harsh fluorescent lights, wore a tight crop top that showed off her flat stomach, and carried herself with the unshakable confidence of someone who had never known a day of real hardship. Her makeup was flawless, a full face of foundation, contour, and shimmering eyeshadow that seemed bizarre in the sterile hospital setting. She clutched a designer purse, a popular model I recognized as the same brand Richard had claimed we couldn't afford for my last birthday. So then he said the funniest thing. The girl was saying to Richard, completely oblivious to her surroundings. He was like, "Baby, you're too good for this place." And I was like, obviously. Richard's laugh was a little forced, but his eyes were bright in a way I hadn't seen in months. When he finally noticed me watching them from my bed, His expression shifted to something caught between guilt and defiance. "Isabella," he said, stepping fully into the room. "This is Kayla. She's a friend from work." Kayla Summers looked around the hospital room with barely concealed disgust, her perfectly sculpted nose wrinkling at the faint smell of disinfectant. Her gaze landed on Mepale. Thin. A mess of wires and tubicants, something like pity mixed with a strange satisfaction, crossed her features. "Oh my God. Kayla's voice was sweet but hollow, like artificial sweetener. "Richard has told me so much about you. How are you feeling?" The question dripped with a false concern so thick I could practically see it. I could see right through it. But what disturbed me more was how Richard stood just a little too close to her. How his hand briefly, almost instinctively, touched the small of her back as she spoke. "I'm managing," I replied, my voice carefully neutral. I studied Richard's face, which was already showing signs of strain. "How are you to know each other again?" "We work together at Morrison and Associates," Richard said quickly. "Kayla's new in marketing." Kayla giggled. She actually giggled in a cardiac care unit. "I'm, totally new to the corporate world. Richard's been showing me the ropes. He's such a good teacher." The way she said the word teacher made my stomach turn. I watched as her perfectly manicured hand briefly touched Richard's arm. A gesture so casual it seemed practiced. "Intimate. That's nice," I managed, my own hands clenching the thin hospital blanket. Richard's always been helpful. Nurse Patricia appeared in the doorway with my evening medications, her presence a welcome interruption. "Visiting hours end in 30 minutes, she announced, giving Kayla's inappropriate outfit a swift, disapproving look. "Of course," Richard said, relieved. "We were just stopping by quickly." "We?" The word hit me like a physical blow. "We?" When had Richard started thinking of himself and this girl as a we? "Actually," Kayla said, pulling out her phone and snapping a quick selfie, angling it to get the forced stand in the background. "This lighting is actually kinda cool. Very authentic." She turned the phone to Richard. "Should we grab dinner after this? At that new sushi place you were telling me about?" I felt something crack inside my chest. And this time, it had nothing to do with my heart condition. That new sushi place. Richard had mentioned wanting to try it last month, but then claimed they needed to save money while I was sick and out of work. "Kayla," Richard said quietly, a clear warning in his voice, but she was already scrolling through her phone, showing him the selfie she'd just taken. "Look how cute we look. Oh, and check out this message from Jessica. She's so jealous about the weekend trip you planned." The room went silent. Utterly. Completely silent. Except for the steady, rhythmic beeping of the machine that was keeping me alive. I stared at Richard, waiting for an explanation. A denial. Anything. But nothing came. His face had gone white, but instead of looking ashamed, he looked angry. Angry at being caught. "Weekend trip?" My voice was barely a whisper. It's not what it sounds like," Richard said defensively, his eyes darting between me and Kayla. "It's a work conference. Team building." Kayla looked genuinely confused. "But you said it was just us, and that we were staying at that little bed and breakfast in." "Kayla," Richard's voice was sharp now, cutting her off. "Maybe you should wait in the hallway." But the damage was done. The pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. The new clothes, the expensive cologne, the longer hours at work, the sudden, intense concern about money. It all made sense now. How long had this been going on? How long had I been the fool, lying in a hospital bed, while my husband planned romantic getaways with a girl barely out of college? "I should go," I said quietly. Though of course, I couldn't go anywhere. "Isabella, you're overreacting," Richard said, but his tone lacked any real conviction. "Kayla is just what?" "Richard," my voice gained a strength I didn't know it possessed. "Just your coworker who knows about weekend trips I've never heard of? Just your friend who takes selfies in my hospital room and talks about your dinner plans, right in front of me?" Kayla shifted uncomfortably, finally seeming to grasp the gravity of the situation she'd so carelessly walked into. "Maybe I should. Maybe you should," I agreed, my eyes never leaving Richard's face. But instead of leaving, Kayla did something that shocked me. She stepped closer to Richard, almost protectively, placing her hand on his arm again. The gesture was small, but its meaning was unmistakable. She was choosing a side, and it wasn't mine. "Look," Kayla said, her voice losing its sweet, sugary tone and taking on a defensive edge. I don't really know what's going on here, but Richard has been nothing but professional with me. If you're suspicious of every woman he works with, maybe the problem isn't him. The sheer audacity of it took my breath away. This girl, this child, was standing in my hospital room, lecturing me about my own marriage, wearing clothes that probably cost more than my weekly medical copay. You're right, I said, and the calmness in my own voice surprised them both. You don't know what's going on here. But I do. I know exactly what's going on. Richard opened his mouth to speak, to lie again, but I held up my hand, silencing him. Get out, I said quietly. Both of you. Just get out. Isabella, Richard started, his voice pleading. Get out. The words tore from my throat with a force that made the heart monitor beside me spike, its calm beeping erupting into a frantic, high-pitched alarm. Get out of my room. Nurse Patricia appeared instantly, her expression alarmed by the shouting and the sudden change on the monitor. I'm going to have to ask you both to leave now. Mrs. Moore needs her rest. Richard hesitated for a moment, looking like he might argue, like he might try to fix the mess he'd made. But Kayla was already tugging on his arm, whispering urgently in his ear. He gave me one last look, a mixture of anger and panic. We'll talk later, he said finally, as if that could solve anything. No, I replied, the tears I'd been holding back finally streaming down my face. We won't. As they left, I caught a glimpse of Kayla in the hallway. She was no longer pretending to be sweet or innocent. She was talking rapidly to Richard, her expression animated, almost excited, as if this gut-wrenching confrontation had been more entertaining than heartbreaking. I collapsed back against my pillows, my whole body shaking uncontrollably. The heart monitor continued its frantic beeping until Patricia returned with a mild sedative. Breathe, honey, the nurse said gently, her hand on my shoulder. Just breathe. But breathing felt impossible when my whole world had just crumbled in the span of 10 minutes. As the sedative began to take effect, a warm fog settling over my mind, I reached for my father's wooden box with a trembling hand. I pulled out another note, one I'd read dozens of times before, but whose meaning had never been so clear. Bella, some people will try to make you feel small so they can feel big. Don't let them. Your worth doesn't decrease based on someone's inability to see it. For the first time since my father's death, I cried not just from sadness, but from rage. A pure, clean rage that burned through the fog of medication and heartbreak. Richard had made me feel small. Kayla had tried to make me feel foolish. They had both misjudged me completely. Tomorrow, I decided. The last coherent thought before the sedative pulled me under. Tomorrow, I would call William Carter. It was time to have that conversation about my father's estate. It was time to find out just how strong I really was. William Carter arrived at precisely 2 p.m. The next day, he carried his weathered leather briefcase and wore the expression of a man who had been expecting my call. I had barely slept, my mind racing through a chaotic slideshow of fury and heartbreak. But when I saw William's familiar, steady figure in the doorway, I felt something I hadn't experienced in weeks. Hope, you sounded different on the phone, William said, foregoing pleasantries as he settled into the visitor's chair. Stronger. I feel different, I admitted. The sedative from the night before had worn off, leaving behind a cold, sharp clarity. Angry, but different. William studied my face carefully, his gaze assessing. Anger can be a useful emotion, Isabella, especially when it's righteous. Your father understood that. William, I need you to tell me something. My voice was steady now, no longer the whisper of a broken woman. Yesterday, you mentioned estate matters that weren't settled. What did you mean? The older man opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick manila folder, its corners worn from use. Your father came to see me 3 months before he passed away. He began, his voice low and serious. He was concerned. Isabella, concerned about your marriage. My heart clenched. He never said anything to me. Howard was a wise man. He knew that sometimes the people we love have to discover certain truths for themselves. William's fingers drummed against the folder, but he also believed in being prepared. Prepared for what? Instead of answering directly, William pulled out a legal document, heavy with official-looking paper. Do you remember your father's original will? The one we read together after the funeral? Of course, I said. The memory's still fresh. He left the house to both Richard and me, with provisions for his investments to be split between us. I paused, Remembering Richard's reaction that day, he had been so effusively grateful, patting my back and saying over and over, "Your dad was so generous to include me." William's expression darkened slightly. "That wasn't your father's final will, Isabella." The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. I stared at the document in William's hands, my mind struggling to process what he had just said. "What do you mean? That wasn't his final will?" "Your father changed his will. He did it exactly 6 weeks before he died. He came to my office on a Tuesday morning and said he'd been watching, thinking, and praying about something for months." William opened the folder completely, revealing a stack of papers. He said he needed to protect what he had built, and more importantly, he needed to protect you. My hands shook as I reached for the document he offered me. The legal language was dense, but certain phrases jumped out at me from the page. Sole beneficiary, exclusive ownership, no marital claims whatsoever. "I don't understand," I whispered. "Why would he do this? Why wouldn't he tell me?" "Because he was hoping he was wrong about Richard." William's voice was gentle but firm. "Your father was an excellent judge of character, Isabella. He built a multi-million-dollar business by reading people. And something about your husband had been bothering him for over a year." "What kind of something?" William reached into his briefcase again and pulled out a small, silver digital recorder. "Howard asked me to give this to you, but only if certain circumstances arose. I believe yesterday's visit from your husband and his friend qualifies as one of those circumstances." I stared at the recorder as if it might explode. "What's on it?" "Your father's voice," William said softly. "His reasons, his instructions, and his final gift to you." With trembling fingers, I took the small device and pressed the play button. My father's familiar voice, warm and deep, filled the sterile hospital room. For a moment, I could almost smell his cologne, almost feel the comforting weight of his presence beside me. "Bella, my darling girl, if you're hearing this, it means that William has determined you need to know the truth. The truth about what I've done, and why I've done it. First, and most importantly, know that every decision I made was out of love for you, not judgment of Richard." I closed my eyes, hot tears streaming down my face. But these were not tears of weakness. They were tears of a deep, profound connection to the man who had always been my protector. "I've been watching your marriage for the past year. Sweetheart, I've seen how Richard looks at his phone when he thinks no one is watching. I've noticed how he's chain gets new clothes, the different schedule, the way he suddenly talks about money all the time when he never used to care about such things. But most importantly, I've seen how he's been treating you. The small dismissals, the lack of interest in your life, the way he makes you feel less than." The recording paused for a moment, and I could hear my father take a deep, weary breath. "I may be old-fashioned, but I believe that when someone marries my daughter, they marry into our family completely. They don't get to pick and choose which parts of that commitment matter to them. And Richard has been picking and choosing." William watched my face carefully as the recording continued, his expression one of quiet sympathy. "So, I've made a decision. A decision that protects everything your grandfather and I built, and everything you deserve to inherit. The house on Maple Street, the investment portfolio, the business interests, the rental properties in Beverly Hills, all of it now belongs to you. To you alone. Richard has no legal claim to any of it, regardless of California's community property laws. Because I have structured everything as a premarital inheritance with specific, ironclad exclusions." My eyes flew open. "Beverly Hills rental properties? What rental properties?" William saw the question on my face and smiled slightly. "Your father was more successful than he let on, my dear. Much more successful." The recording continued, my father's voice growing stronger, more resolute. "The total value of what I am leaving you is approximately $4.2 million. Bella, listen to me. You are not dependent on anyone. You never have to accept less than you deserve from anyone, ever again. And if Richard truly loves you, if he is the man I hoped he was, then this won't matter to him at all. If it does matter to him, well, then you'll know exactly who you married." The room fell silent except for the steady, calm beeping of the heart monitor. I stared at the legal documents, my mind reeling. $4 million. $4.2 million. To be exact, William corrected gently. And that was 8 months ago. The investments have grown since then. "Richard doesn't know any of this?" I asked, my voice a hoarse whisper. "Richard knows nothing. As far as he is aware, your father's original will stands, and he believes he's entitled to half of a very modest estate. William leaned forward, his expression serious. The question, Isabella, is what do you want to do with this information? I thought about Richard's cold dismissal of my medical bills, his constant complaints about money, his eagerness to discuss practical things while I lay in a hospital bed, possibly dying. I thought about Kayla's designer purse and expensive outfit, the weekend trips and sushi dinners that Richard had claimed we couldn't afford. A plan began to form in my mind, cold and clear as ice. I want to wait, I said finally, my voice devoid of its earlier tremor. Wait for what? I want to see exactly how far he'll go. I want to know who I really married. William. Before I decide what comes next. My voice was growing stronger with each word. Can you keep this a secret for just a little longer? William smiled, and it was the same proud expression my father used to wear whenever I accomplished something. Your father always said you were smarter than you gave yourself credit for. I can keep the secret for as long as you need me to. My dear, there's something else, I said, sitting up straighter in the bed, feeling a surge of energy I hadn't felt in months. I want to be released from this hospital. The doctor said I need rest and medication. I can get both of those things at home. I met William's gaze, my own filled with a new, unshakable resolve. I want to go home. William. I want to see what happens when I'm not trapped in this room. I want to see what Richard does when he thinks he has more freedom to be himself. William studied my face for a long moment, seeing the shift that had taken place. Are you sure you're ready for what you might discover? I reached for my father's wooden box and pulled out one final note, its message suddenly feeling like a direct order. Courage isn't the absence of fear, Bella. It's feeling the fear and choosing to act anyway. I love you. Dad. I'm ready, I said. And for the first time in a very long time, I truly meant it. As William packed up his briefcase, he paused at the door. Your father would be very proud of you right now. Isabella, you're about to show Richard Moore exactly what Howard Moore's daughter is made of. After he left, I reached for my phone and dialed the nurse's station. This is Isabella Moore in room 407, I said, my voice clear and confident. I'd like to speak with Dr. Matthews about my discharge procedures. The storm my father had mentioned was coming. But this time, I wouldn't just weather it. I would control it. The house on Maple Street looked different when I stepped out of the Uber on Friday afternoon. Maybe it was the newfound clarity that came with knowing I owned every brick, every shingle, every blade of grass in the meticulously maintained yard. Or maybe it was simply seeing it through the eyes of someone who was no longer a victim, but a strategist. Dr. Matthews had reluctantly agreed to discharge me with a litany of strict instructions, daily medication, weekly checkups, and absolutely no stress. I had nodded solemnly at each condition while mentally preparing for what I knew would be the most stressful week of my life. I used my key quietly, unsure if Richard was home. The grating sound of a television drifted from the living room, a basketball game, playing at high volume. I followed the sound and found him sprawled on our cream-colored sofa, a beer in hand, his feet propped up on the polished cherry-wood coffee table my father had given us as a wedding gift. Isabella. He jumped up, looking genuinely startled, a splash of beer sloshing onto the rug. What are you doing here? I thought you weren't getting out until next week. I felt better, I said, my voice calm and even. The doctor said I could recover just as well at home. I studied his face, looking for any sign of disappointment, any flicker of concern that his freedom was being curtailed. That's great. Honey. The endearment sounded rusty. An antique pulled out of storage and dusted off for the occasion. I wasn't expecting you. I would have cleaned up, gotten some groceries. The refrigerator was indeed nearly empty, except for a 6-pack of imported beer, a half-eaten box of takeout pizza, and a bottle of expensive champagne I didn't recognize. I noted the champagne but said nothing. It's fine, I said, my gaze sweeping over the cluttered living room. I'm just tired. I think I'll go rest upstairs. Of course. Do you need any help? The offer was perfunctory, a line delivered without feeling, and we both knew it. I can manage. As I climbed the stairs, each step feeling steadier than the last, I heard Richard's phone buzz. His voice followed, lower now, but still audible in the quiet house. Hey. It's me, yeah. She came home early, no. I don't know for how long, look. We just need to be more careful for a few days. I paused on the landing, my hand gripping the banister. My heart pounded, not from exertion, but from the cold, hard confirmation of what I already knew. I continued to our bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed we had shared for 5 years. The room smelled different. A faint, unfamiliar perfume lingered in the air. Something floral and cloyingly sweet. The kind a very young woman would wear. Kayla. I opened the clothes hamper and found what I was looking for almost immediately. Tucked beneath Richard's gym clothes was a silk scarf I had never seen before. It was a vibrant pink, printed with a designer logo. The kind of careless, expensive accessory Kayla might wear. I held it up to the light, noting the label, then carefully placed it back exactly where I'd found it. Evidence. My phone rang, and William's name appeared on the screen. He was checking in. "How are you feeling? Being home?" he asked without preamble, like I'm seeing everything clearly for the first time. I replied, keeping my voice low. "William, can I ask you something? Based on what my father observed, how long do you think this has been going on?" There was a short pause on the other end of the line. "At least 6 months," William said, his voice gentle but honest. "Possibly longer." "Why?" "There's evidence. Here in our bedroom. She's been in my house." "William." "In my bed." Another long pause. "I'm sorry. My dear. I know this must be incredibly painful." "It is," I said, moving to the window and looking down at the garden my father had helped me plant 3 years ago. "But it's also clarifying." A cold resolve was settling in my bones, pushing out the last vestiges of grief. "I want to accelerate things." "What do you mean by that?" "I want Richard to show me exactly who he is. All of it. I want him to feel confident enough to stop hiding." "Isabella, are you sure that's wise?" The stress of not knowing is worse than the stress of knowing," I interrupted, my voice firm. "My father taught me that knowledge is power. And right now, I want all the knowledge I can get." That evening, Richard made an effort at domesticity that was almost comical in its transparency. He ordered Thai food from my favorite restaurant, opened a bottle of wine, and asked about my treatment with what seemed like genuine interest. It was a performance, and I was the sole audience member. "So, the heart medication is working?" he asked, pushing noodles around his plate. "Dr. Matthews is optimistic," I replied, sipping my wine slowly. "He says my condition is manageable with the right care. I should be able to return to normal activities soon." I saw something flicker across Richard's face. It was there for only a second, but I saw it. Disappointment. A flash of concern that his newfound freedom was about to be revoked. "That's wonderful," he said, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "Though you shouldn't rush things. Recovery takes time." "Speaking of time," I said carefully, setting my trap. "I was thinking we should plan something together. Maybe a weekend trip when I'm feeling a little stronger. We haven't done that in so long." Richard nearly choked on his wine. "A trip? Well, that sounds nice. But with all the medical bills and everything, we'll manage," I said, watching his face intently. "In fact, I've been thinking about our finances a lot lately. Maybe it's time I took a more active role in managing our money." No, that's not necessary." His response was quick, almost panicked. "You need to focus on getting better. I've got everything under control." "I'm sure you do." I smiled sweetly. "But I'd still like to understand our situation better. Maybe we could go over the accounts together this weekend?" "This weekend?" Richard's phone buzzed on the table, and he glanced at it reflexively. A message from Kayla. "No doubt. Actually, I might have to work this weekend. There's a big project deadline." I nodded sympathetically, playing my part. "Of course. Work comes first." Later that night, as Richard showered, I heard his phone buzz repeatedly on the nightstand. The bathroom door was closed. The sound of the water running. I picked up the phone. I didn't even need to unlock it. Multiple message previews from Kay lit up the screen. "Can't wait for tomorrow night. Did you get the hotel room yet? The nice one we talked about. Should I bring the red dress you like?" My hands were perfectly steady as I set the phone down exactly where Richard had left it. The rage was a cold, solid thing inside me now. Not hot and chaotic, but focused. I was in bed, pretending to be asleep, my breathing even and slow, when Richard emerged from the bathroom. "Isabella?" he whispered. "You awake?" I didn't move. He stood there for a moment, then moved quietly around the room, gathering clothes from his closet and putting them into a small duffel bag. He was packing for his weekend work project. On Saturday morning, Richard left early with an elaborate and entirely fictional story about client meetings and potential overtime. He kissed my forehead the first time he had kissed me in weeks and told me to rest. "I'll probably be late," he said, his eyes avoiding mine. "Don't wait up." The moment his car disappeared down Maple Street, I called William. "It's time," I said when he answered. "Time for what?" "My dear, time to visit the hotel room Richard booked for his work project." "Isabella, I must advise against this. A direct confrontation. I'm not going to confront them." "William, I just want to see it with my own eyes. I want to know exactly what I'm dealing with before I decide how to handle it. This could be dangerous for your health." "The shock. Not knowing is more dangerous," I said, already getting dressed. My father didn't raise a woman who hides from the truth. 2 hours later, I was sitting in the opulent lobby of the Ritz-Carlton downtown, wearing dark sunglasses and a wide-brimmed hat, watching the elevator doors. I had called the hotel earlier, claiming to be Richard's personal assistant, and confirmed his reservation with a combination of charm and careful deception. I knew his room number. I knew his check-in time. At 3 p.m. on the dot, the elevator doors opened, and out stepped Richard and Kayla. But this wasn't the same tacky girl from the hospital. This Kayla was transformed. She wore an elegant black dress that hugged her curves, her hair styled professionally, her makeup subtle and sophisticated. She carried herself not like a college student, but like a woman accustomed to luxury. She looked expensive, polished, and completely at home in the 5-star hotel. They walked through the lobby like a real couple, Richard's hand resting possessively on the small of her back, Kayla laughing at something he whispered in her ear. They looked happy, natural, like they belonged together. I watched them disappear into the hotel restaurant, and for the first time since discovering the truth, I felt something beyond anger or hurt. I felt power. Because while Richard was playing house with his young girlfriend in a hotel he couldn't afford, I owned a $4 million estate he knew nothing about. While he was fretting about medical bills and mortgage payments, I had rental properties in Beverly Hills generating an income he could never imagine. I pulled out my phone and called William. "I've seen enough," I said, my voice as cold and clear as glass. "It's time to end this charade. What do you want to do?" "Isabella?" I watched through the restaurant's large glass walls as Richard fed Kayla a bite of some decadent-looking dessert, both of them laughing like lovesick teenagers. "I want to give Richard exactly what he's been asking for," I said. "His freedom. All the freedom he can handle." My voice turned to ice. "And Kayla is about to learn what happens when you play games with a woman who has absolutely nothing left to lose." As I walked out of the hotel and into the bright California sunshine, I felt my father's presence stronger than ever. Howard Moore had raised his daughter to be smart, strong, and strategic. It was time to honor that legacy. Sunday evening arrived with the kind of Los Angeles sunset that made everything look cinematic. Golden light streamed through the windows of the Maple Street house. As I prepared for the performance of my life, I had spent the day planning every detail, reviewing every line, with the same precision my father had taught me when looking over business contracts. This was not about emotion anymore. It was about execution. Richard returned home at 9 p.m. He carried the satisfied, slightly rumpled glow of a man who had spent 2 days living exactly as he pleased. His hair was mussed. His clothes were wrinkled in a way that suggested they'd been hastily put back on, and he carried the faint, lingering scent of Kayla's floral perfume. "Hey," he said, dropping his duffel bag by the door with a thud. "How are you feeling?" "You look better." "I feel much better, actually," I replied, looking up from one of my father's old business journals that I'd been reading for inspiration. "Almost like myself again." "That's great," Richard said, moving to the kitchen and opening the refrigerator. "Did you eat dinner? I made some soup earlier. There's some left if you want it." "Nah, I grabbed something with the clients," he said. The lie rolled off his tongue so easily, so naturally, that I marveled at how much practice he must have had. As Richard showered, washing away the evidence of his weekend, I positioned myself at the kitchen table. I set up my laptop and arranged several manila folders props for the crucial conversation I was about to initiate. When he emerged from the bedroom wearing the silk pajamas I had given him last Christmas, I looked up with the carefully crafted expression of someone who has just made a monumental decision. "Richard, can we talk?" I began, my tone serious. "I've been doing a lot of thinking about our situation." He stiffened slightly, towel drying his hair. "What kind of situation?" "Financial?" Medical? Our future? I said, gesturing to the folder spread out before me. I know you've been stressed about money, Richard, and I think I have a solution. He sat across from me, his expression cautious, wary. What kind of solution? I want to sell my father's house. The words hung in the air like a grenade with the pin pulled. Richard's eyes widened, and I could practically see the dollar signs reflecting in them. Sell your father's house? Isabella, that's a big decision. Are you sure you're thinking clearly? I'm thinking more clearly than I have in months. I opened one of the folders, revealing a set of real estate listings I had printed earlier. The market is strong right now. A house like Dad's, in that neighborhood, could easily sell for $800,000. Maybe more. Richard leaned forward, his caution replaced by a sudden, intense interest. 800,000. According to these comps. Yes, I confirmed, watching his face carefully. And since it's my inheritance, the money would be ours. Free and clear. I let that sink in. We could pay off all the medical bills. Take that trip we talked about. We could start fresh. Start fresh, Richard repeated, and something in his voice made my skin crawl. He didn't sound excited about saving our marriage. He sounded excited about the money. Of course. We'd need to be smart about it. I continued, reeling him in further. Make sure we're making the right decision for both of us. I paused, letting the weight of my next words land squarely. That is, if we still have a future together. His head snapped up, his eyes meeting mine. What do you mean by that? I closed the folder slowly, my movements deliberate and calm. Richard, do you think I'm stupid? What? No, of course not. Why would you ask me that? Because you've been treating me like I am for months. My voice remained conversational, devoid of accusation. The late nights at work, the new clothes, the sudden, desperate concern about money, the mysterious work conferences on weekends. Richard's face went pale. Isabella, I don't know what you're implying. I'm not implying anything. I'm stating facts. I picked up my phone, which was resting on the table, and swiped to a photo I had taken from my discreet position in the Ritz-Carlton lobby. I turned the screen towards him. This is you and Kayla yesterday afternoon, at a 5-star hotel restaurant, during your work conference. The photo was damningly clear. It showed Richard and Kayla in a moment of unguarded intimacy, his hand on her face as he fed her a bite of dessert, both of them laughing. He stared at the screen, his mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. How did you? It doesn't matter how, I said, setting the phone down. What matters is that now, we both know where we stand. The lies are over. Richard ran a hand through his damp hair, his carefully constructed composure finally cracking. Isabella, it's not what you think. Kayla and I were just what? My voice remained eerily calm. Just friends who book hotel rooms together. Just co-workers who share champagne and weekend getaways. Just two people who text each other about red dresses and how they can't wait for the night to begin. You read my texts. Your phone was buzzing all night when you first came home. I couldn't help but notice the previews. I stood up slowly, taking control of the room. The question isn't what I know, Richard. The question is, what are you going to do about it? He was sweating now, despite the evening chill. What do you mean? I'm giving you a choice. I moved to the window, looking out at the dark garden my father had loved so much. We can try to work this out. We can go to counseling, therapy, whatever it takes to fix this broken thing between us. Or, I turned back to face him. We can end this marriage. Cleanly. With dignity. End it. A divorce. Richard. The word you've been dancing around for weeks. The thing you've been too cowardly to say out loud. I never said I wanted a divorce. You didn't have to. I replied softly. Spending your weekends with another woman says it for you. I sat back down at the table, my movements graceful and controlled. But here's what I am offering you. If you want out, we can do this the easy way. I will sell my father's house. We will split everything fairly. And you can be with Kayla without all the sneaking around. Richard's expression shifted from panic to something that looked almost like relief. You'd do that? I would rather have an honest enemy than a lying husband. I opened another one of the folders. I've already spoken to a lawyer. We could have the papers drawn up within the week. What about the money? From your father's house? And there it was. The question I had been waiting for. Not, what about our marriage? Not, can we really fix this? But what about the money? California is a community property state, I said, repeating the script William had carefully coached me on. Legally, half of everything acquired during the marriage belongs to each spouse. The proceeds from the house sale would be split between us. 50-50. Richard was quiet for a long moment. I could see him doing the math in his head. For $100,000. Enough to start a new life with Kayla. Enough to play the role of the wealthy, successful boyfriend for a good long while. You're serious about this? He said finally, his voice a low murmur. Dead serious, I said, meeting his eyes. But I need to know that you are, too. If we're doing this, I want complete honesty. No more lies. No more games. I leaned forward slightly. Are you in love with Kayla? The direct question seemed to surprise him. He hesitated. Then a wave of resolve washed over his face. Yes, he said. I am. How long? Since last spring. Maybe earlier. His voice gained confidence as he spoke, as if finally telling the truth or his version of it was liberating. She makes me feel alive again. Isabella? Young. Like I can be the man I used to be. And what about me? I asked, my voice genuinely curious. Did I make you feel dead? He had the decency to look ashamed for a fleeting moment. You made me feel responsible. Weighed down. Like I had to be someone I wasn't. I nodded slowly, filing away every word for later use. I see. And you think Kayla will be different? She doesn't need anything from me, except what I want to give her, he said, warming to his theme now, clearly convinced that I was making this incredibly easy for him. She's independent, free-spirited. She has her own life. I thought about Kayla's designer clothes, the 5-star hotel, the lifestyle that seemed far beyond a junior marketing assistant's salary. But I kept my observations to myself. Well then, I said, standing up, I think we understand each other perfectly. So we're really doing this? Getting a divorce? We're really doing this. I moved toward the stairs. I'll call the lawyer tomorrow and tell him to start the paperwork. You can call Kayla and tell her the good news. Isabella? His voice stopped me at the foot of the stairs. For what it's worth, I'm sorry. For the lying. For hurting you. You deserve better. I turned back to him one last time, and my smile was radiant. The first genuine, unrestrained smile I'd worn in months. You're absolutely right, I said. I do deserve better. Much, much better than you could ever imagine. As I climbed the stairs to begin packing my things, I heard Richard already dialing his phone. Kayla, it's me. We need to talk. About us. About the future. His voice faded as I reached the landing. I went into my bedroom and pulled out a suitcase, humming softly to myself. Tomorrow, I would move back into my father's house, the house I had just promised to sell, but which I actually owned outright. Tomorrow, I would begin the next phase of my plan. Phase 1. Getting Richard to confess his sins and ask for the divorce himself was complete. Phase 2 was going to be much more interesting. The law offices of Carter and Associates occupied the top 2 floors of a gleaming Beverly Hills high-rise, with panoramic views of Los Angeles sprawling all the way to the hazy blue line of the Pacific. I sat in William's mahogany-paneled conference room on Tuesday morning, watching Richard fidget with his tie while Kayla examined her manicure, with an air of bored precision. 3 days had passed since our kitchen conversation, and Richard, spurred by the prospect of a massive payday, had moved with astonishing speed. He had retained his own lawyer, a sharp-dressed man named Trevor Walsh, who specialized in aggressive asset protection, and had insisted that Kayla attend the initial meeting as his emotional support. I had agreed to everything with gracious understanding, playing the role of the accommodating, soon-to-be ex-wife to absolute perfection. Before we begin, William announced, settling his reading glasses on his nose and looking over the documents spread before him, I need to clarify something regarding Mrs. Moore's inheritance that directly affects these proceedings. Richard leaned forward eagerly, a greedy glint in his eyes. The house appraisal came in higher than we expected, didn't it? I read that some of those properties near the hills are selling for over $1 million now. Kayla, who had been scrolling through her phone, perked up at the mention of $1 million. Her phone disappeared into her designer handbag. She had dressed for the occasion in a cream-colored power suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Her blonde hair was swept into a sophisticated chignon that was meant to make her look older, more refined. She was playing the part of the future wealthy man's partner. Not exactly, William said, his voice level and calm as he opened a thick, Official-looking file folder. There seems to have been a fundamental misunderstanding about the nature of Mrs. Moore's inheritance. Trevor Walsh, Richard's attorney, frowned. What kind of misunderstanding? Mr. Carter. My client was under the impression that the estate was relatively straightforward. One house, some modest investments, standard community property division. That's what I thought. Too. Richard said, a note of confusion creeping into his voice. Howard's will was pretty clear about everything being split between Isabella and me. William smiled, and I recognized the expression instantly. It was the same look my father used to get just before he was about to close a particularly important business deal, a look of absolute, unshakable control. Mr. Moore. The will you are referring to was Mr. Howard Moore's original will, dated 3 years ago. However, 6 weeks prior to his death, Mr. Moore executed a new will, a final will, and its terms are significantly different. The room went silent, the only sound the soft hum of the building's air conditioning. I watched Richard's face carefully, noting the exact moment when confusion curdled into concern. Different how? Trevor asked, his professional instincts clearly sensing trouble on the horizon. Different in that Mrs. Isabella Moore is the sole beneficiary of her father's entire estate, William stated, his words dropping into the silence like stones into a still pond. Mr. Richard Moore has no claim to any portion of the inheritance, as it has been legally and irrevocably structured as premarital property with specific, written exclusions for any and all spousal claims. Richard blinked slowly, as if the words weren't processing correctly in his brain. That's impossible. Howard included me in his will. He told me so himself. He included you in his original will. Yes, William corrected gently. But circumstances changed, and Mr. Moore chose to protect his daughter's financial future independently. He slid a document across the polished table, a document bearing official court seals and multiple signatures. This is the final, legally binding will, which supersedes all previous versions. Trevor Walsh took the document and began to read, his polished expression growing increasingly grim with every line. Richard watched his lawyer's face like a man watching a doctor deliver a terminal diagnosis. This can't be right, Richard said, his voice rising in panic. We've been married for 5 years. Community property laws don't apply to premarital inheritance that has been specifically and legally excluded from marital assets. Trevor finished quietly, looking up from the document with an expression of defeat. I'm afraid this document appears to be ironclad. Kayla, who had been following the conversation with growing alarm, finally spoke for the first time. Wait, so there's no money? No house sale? Oh, there's money, William said pleasantly. Quite a lot of it, actually. Mrs. Moore's inheritance includes a family home, a diversified investment portfolio, 3 rental properties in Beverly Hills, and several private business interests. The total current value is approximately $4.8 million. The number hit the room like a physical force. Richard's face went white, then a blotchy red, then white again. Kayla's perfectly painted mouth fell open, her sophisticated composure cracking like cheap veneer. $4.8 million, Richard whispered, the words barely audible. Indeed, William continued smoothly, none of which has any bearing on your divorce proceedings, since none of it was acquired during your marriage. He turned to me, his expression one of grandfatherly affection. Your father was quite thorough in protecting your interests. My dear, I had been silent through the entire exchange, watching the reactions play out like scenes in a movie I already knew the ending to. Now, I spoke, my voice calm and measured. I wanted to tell you this in person, Richard, because despite everything, I believe you deserve to hear it directly from me. I turned to face him fully, letting him see the strength in my eyes. My father changed his will because he suspected you were having an affair. He what? The words came out as a shocked croak. 6 weeks before he died, he came to my hospital room. He said he was worried about you. About us. He said he'd noticed changes in your behavior, your spending, your attitude toward our marriage. My voice remained steady, but my eyes were laser focused on Richard's face, pinning him in place. He asked me if everything was all right between us. What did you tell him? Richard asked, his voice a hoarse whisper. I told him that you were working hard, that the stress was getting to you, but that we were fine. I said, letting the weight of my next words sink in. I defended you, Richard, to my own dying father. I defended you. I convinced him that his concerns about my husband were unfounded. The shame that washed over Richard's face was so raw and profound that even Kayla looked away. But Dad was too smart to take my word for it. I continued, my voice hardening. So he hired a private investigator. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Richard's attorney shifted uncomfortably in his chair. A private investigator? Kayla's voice was barely a whisper. William opened another folder and spread several glossy, black and white photographs across the conference table. They were images of Richard and Kayla at various restaurants, holding hands outside a movie theater, kissing in the parking lot of an upscale hotel. These were taken over a 6-week period, ending just 3 days before Mr. Moore passed away. William explained clinically. He never confronted either of you. He chose to focus his remaining energy on protecting his daughter's future, rather than addressing your present choices. Richard stared at the photographs as if they were evidence of someone else's life. He knew. He breathed. He knew the whole time. And he never said anything. Oh, he said something. I replied. My voice cold. He said it to his lawyer. He said it in a new will. An unbreakable will that ensured his daughter would never be financially dependent on a man who was already planning to leave her. Kayla had gone completely silent, her face a pale mask beneath her expertly applied makeup. The sophisticated armor she had worn into the room was dissolving, revealing the frightened young woman underneath, who was just beginning to understand the magnitude of the game she had lost. So there was no community property? Trevor asked, though he clearly already knew the answer. No marital assets to divide? The house they currently live in is a rental property owned by Mrs. Moore's estate. William explained. Mr. Moore has effectively been living there as Mrs. Moore's guest. Their joint checking account contains approximately $3,000, and Mr. Moore's personal assets consist of his car and his $401k from his employer. That's it. Richard's voice cracked. That's all I get after 5 years of marriage. That's all you brought to the marriage. I replied simply. My father's money was never yours. Richard, you just thought it was. The silence in the room stretched out, thick and suffocating, until Kayla finally spoke, her voice small and uncertain. Richard, maybe we should talk about this privately. Talk about what? Richard snapped, rounding on her with a fury born of pure desperation. Talk about how we planned our entire future around money that was never going to exist. Talk about how I just gave up my marriage for nothing. You didn't give it up for nothing, I said quietly, and all eyes turned to me. You gave it up for love. That's what you told me. Just 3 nights ago. You said Kayla made you feel alive. You said you were in love with her. Richard looked from my composed face to Kayla's panicked one. And for the first time, the full, devastating reality of his situation seemed to be sinking in. No fortune to split. No luxurious fresh start. Just him, Kayla, and the stark, ugly consequences of their choices. This is insane, he said finally, his voice shaking. There has to be something I can do. Some legal challenge. Mr. Moore, Trevor interrupted gently but firmly. The will is ironclad. Your late father-in-law was clearly advised by excellent counsel. There is no legal basis for any claim against the estate, but the divorce proceedings can continue. Of course, William added helpfully. Mrs. Moore is perfectly willing to divide the marital assets fairly. $3,000, split 50-50, comes to $1,500 each. The sum sounded obscene in the opulent conference room. $1,500, less than what Kayla had probably spent on her suit. I stood up, smoothing the front of my simple but elegant dress with a sense of complete composure. I think we've covered everything we needed to cover today. Richard, you can stay in the house through the end of the month while you make other arrangements. After that, I'll need you to vacate the premises. I'm planning some renovations. Renovations for what? He asked numbly. I smiled. It was the same confident, victorious expression my father used to wear when he had successfully closed a deal. I'm moving back home, I said. After all, it's where I belong. The silence in Richard's BMW as they drove away from the law office was suffocating. Kayla stared out the passenger window at the sprawling Beverly Hills mansions, each one a monument to the life she had believed was within her grasp just 2 hours ago. Richard gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles had gone white. His jaw clenched in a rictus of fury and disbelief. Say something, Kayla finally whispered, her voice fragile. What do you want me to say? Richard's voice was hollow, devoid of its usual confidence. That I'm sorry. That I didn't know. That I somehow missed the fact that my wife is a multimillionaire and I'm about to be homeless? We'll figure it out, Kayla said. But the words lacked conviction. You still have your job. We can get an apartment together. With what money? Richard pulled into the parking lot of a Starbucks, needing to stop moving before he lost control completely. He turned to face her, his eyes wild with panic. Do you have any idea what apartments cost in this city? Do you know what my salary actually is when it's not supplemented by what I thought was our community property? Kayla's silence was answer enough. She had never asked about his real income. She had never needed to. Not when he was paying for 5-star hotels and designer gifts without any apparent concern. $78,000 a year, Richard said flatly, the number sounding pathetic even to him. That's what I make. Before taxes, after taxes, health insurance, and retirement contributions. I take home about $4,800 a month. The number seemed to physically hurt Kayla. She had been making $35,000 as a junior marketing assistant, but for the past 6 months, she had been living like someone who made 3 times that much. A lifestyle entirely subsidized by Richard's access to what they had both believed was Isabella's family money. We can make that work, she said weakly. Can we? Richard's tone was becoming sharper, accusatory. Because the math doesn't look good from here. Kayla, rent on a decent 1-bedroom apartment in a safe neighborhood is at least $2,500. Add utilities, groceries, car payments, insurance, and we're already over budget. And that's before we even factor in your student loans. Kayla's face had gone pale. My student loans are deferred. For how long? And what about your credit cards? He pressed, the anger finally finding a target. What about that purse you bought last week? Those shoes? The jewelry I bought you? Those were gifts. From you? They were gifts I bought with money I thought I had. Richard slammed his hand against the steering wheel, the sound making Kayla jump. Everything we've been doing, everything we've been planning, was based on a lie. A lie you believed, too. Kayla shot back, her own composure finally cracking. You're acting like this is all my fault. Like I somehow tricked you into thinking your wife was secretly rich. Didn't you? The words hung between them like a blade. Because looking back, you were awfully interested in my financial situation from the very beginning. Remember that conversation on our second date? All those questions about my future prospects. About how my father-in-law had done well for himself? Kayla's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. She did remember that conversation. She had been probing, assessing his long-term value. I wasn't, she stammered. You weren't what? Gold digging. Richard's laugh was a bitter, ugly sound. Because that's exactly what it looks like from where I'm sitting. Don't you dare. Kayla's voice turned sharp. I fell in love with you. Richard. Maybe I liked that you seemed successful and could afford nice things. But that's not why I'm with you. Then prove it. Richard challenged, his voice low and dangerous. Come with me to look at studio apartments in Van Nuys. Come with me to shop at Target instead of Nordstrom. Come with me to live the life we can actually afford. The life I'm now stuck with. Kayla stared at him. And for the first time, Richard saw something in her eyes that made his stomach drop. It was calculation. The same cool, practical assessment she had probably given him on that second date. She was weighing her options, and he was coming up short. I need some time to think, she said finally. Time to think about what? About us? About what this all means. Kayla was already reaching for her phone, her gaze dropping to the screen. I should call my roommate, Jessica. See if I can stay with her for a few days while we figure things out. Your roommate? Kayla, we just went through the biggest crisis of our relationship, and you want to run to your roommate? I need space to process this. Richard, this whole situation is insane. She was scrolling through her contacts, deliberately not meeting his eyes. Everything we planned, everything we talked about for our future, it's all different now. Richard felt a cold dread settle in his chest. Everything we planned was based on us being together. That part shouldn't change just because the money situation changed. Easy for you to say, Kayla muttered under her breath, then seemed to realize what she had revealed. Easy for me to say? Richard's voice rose, incredulous. I am the one who just lost everything. My marriage, my home, my financial future. You chose to lose those things. Kayla interrupted, her voice suddenly strong and clear. Nobody forced you to have an affair. Nobody forced you to ask for a divorce. The accusation, coming from her, hit Richard like a physical blow. I chose to lose them for you. For us. No. Kayla said, her voice turning cold. You chose to lose them because you were unhappy and bored. I was just convenient. The word convenient echoed in the small space between them. Richard stared at this young woman he had thrown his life away for. And he saw her clearly for the first time. The sweetness. The adoration. The way she had made him feel like a king. It had all been a performance. A carefully constructed illusion based on the assumption that he had something to offer. Beyond his aging good looks and a mid-level corporate salary. So, what now? He asked quietly, already knowing the answer. Kayla was already texting someone, her thumbs flying over the screen. I'm going to stay with Jessica for a while. You should focus on figuring out your living situation. My living situation? What about our living situation? Richard, be realistic. Kayla's voice had taken on a tone of patient, condescending explanation, as if she were talking to a difficult child. We kind of rushed into this whole thing. Maybe this is a sign we should slow down. See how we feel when everything isn't so crazy. Richard felt the last pieces of his world crumbling into dust. You're breaking up with me. I'm not breaking up with you, she said, though her words were a transparent lie. I'm just taking a step back. She finally looked at him directly. Her eyes devoided the affection he had grown accustomed to. This isn't how I thought things would go. How did you think things would go? He asked, the question heavy with accusation. Kayla struggled for a moment. Then her honesty was brutal in its simplicity. I thought we'd have options, she said. I thought we'd be able to build something nice together. But if you're starting over from nothing, she didn't need to finish the sentence. Then I'm not willing to start over with you. Richard started the car without another word. The 20-minute drive to Kayla's friend's apartment in West Hollywood felt like ours, punctuated only by the sound of Kayla's texting and the growing, sickening realization that he had destroyed his marriage for a woman who had never really wanted him at all. When they pulled up outside the trendy apartment building, Kayla gathered her purse and phone with efficient, final movements. I'll call you in a few days, she said, not looking at him. When I've had time to think about everything. Kayla. His voice stopped her as she reached for the door handle. Did you ever love me? Really? She turned back to him. And for a brief, unguarded moment, her mask slipped completely. He saw the real Kayla underneath young, ambitious, calculating, and utterly focused on her own survival. I loved who I thought you were, she said softly. I'm sorry that person doesn't exist anymore. After she disappeared into the building, Richard sat in his car for a long time, staring at the luxury apartments around him, places he and Kayla had dreamed of living. Now, he couldn't even afford a studio in the worst part of town. He thought about Isabella, probably at that very moment moving back into her father's beautiful, multi-million-dollar house, surrounded by the quiet security of generational wealth. He thought about the look in her eyes during the meeting, the hatred, but something far worse, pity. His phone buzzed. It was a text from Kayla. Thanks for understanding. I need some time to figure out my next steps. He stared at the message, noting that she hadn't said her next steps, or even mentioned him at all. He was alone now. Truly. Completely alone. And for the first time since this whole miserable mess had started, he understood exactly what Isabella had meant when she had smiled that radiant, victorious smile. She did deserve better. Much, much better than him. Isabella stood in the doorway of her father's house, her housey, on a Thursday morning, breathing in the familiar scent of jasmine from the garden and the faint, comforting aroma of her father's favorite coffee that seemed to linger in the very walls. 3 weeks had passed since a meeting at William's office, and she had spent every day of it preparing for this moment. The house on the hill in Beverly Hills was everything the rental on Maple Street was not: spacious, elegant, filled with natural light and memories that brought her joy instead of pain. Built in the 1940s and meticulously maintained, it featured original hardwood floors, a chef's kitchen with granite countertops, and French doors that opened onto a lush garden that had been her father's pride and joy. The master bedroom overlooks the rose garden. She told Dr. Matthews, who had insisted on making a house call to ensure her new living situation would support her continued recovery. Dad always said the morning light in that room was better than any medicine. It's beautiful, Isabella, Dr. Matthews said, checking her blood pressure on the sun-drenched patio. Her readings were the best they had been in over a year. How are you feeling about the transition? Honestly? Isabella watched a hummingbird dart between the feeders her father had hung throughout the garden. Like I'm finally coming home. I should have moved back here months ago. And your stress levels? The divorce proceedings? Isabella's smile was serene. Surprisingly manageable. It helps when you're finally living in truth instead of lies. What Isabella didn't mention was how therapeutic it had been to watch Richard's life unravel. With a kind of mathematical precision. Through mutual friends and her own quiet observations, she learned that he was staying in a cheap motel near his office. That Kayla had officially ended their relationship. And that he had been frantically calling real estate agents about studio apartments he couldn't afford. Mrs. Maria Gonzalez, the housekeeper who had worked for her father for over a decade, appeared in the doorway, her face wreathed in a warm smile. The moving truck just pulled up. Perfect timing. Isabella stood, her movements steady and strong. The heart medication was working beautifully. And with the primary source of her stress now removed from her life, her recovery had accelerated. After the doctor left, Isabella supervised the movers as they carried boxes into her new life. Most of her personal belongings from the Maple Street house fit easily into 2 of the 5 bedrooms, a stark reminder of how little of herself she had actually put into that shared life. Her most precious possessions, her father's books, his photograph collection, the wooden box of his letters were given places of honor throughout the house, as if summoned by her thoughts. The doorbell rang. Isabella opened it to find her college roommate, Jennifer Walsh, standing on the porch with a bottle of expensive champagne and an enormous grin. "Welcome home, Bella." Jennifer swept her into a hug that smelled of success and expensive perfume. As a senior partner at a prestigious marketing firm, Jennifer had always been a whirlwind of energy and ambition. They settled on the patio with the champagne, and Isabella found herself telling Jennifer the entire story: the fair, the hospital confrontation, the stunning revelation about her inheritance, and the spectacular implosion of her marriage in William's office. "So, let me get this straight," Jennifer said, refilling their glasses. "Your deadbeat husband cheated on you with a gold-digging bimbo, then demanded a divorce because he thought you were poor and sick, only to discover that you're actually a multimillionaire, and he's getting nothing but $1,500 and an eviction notice? That's the simplified version." "Yes." Isabella laughed. A real, genuine laugh that came from deep inside. "That is the most beautiful story of karmic justice I have ever heard," Jennifer declared, raising her glass. "To your father, for being a brilliant judge of character, and to you, for playing this whole thing like a chess grandmaster." Jennifer's expression turned serious for a moment. "But seriously, Bella, are you okay? Really okay? Because you seem almost happy about all this." Isabella considered the question carefully. 3 months ago, the idea of being divorced and alone would have terrified her. But now, she felt something she hadn't experienced in years. "Freedom. I think I am happy," she said finally. "For the first time in a long time, I'm living my actual life, instead of some performance of what I thought a wife was supposed to be." Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of a car pulling into the driveway. Through the living room window, Isabella could see a familiar BMW parked awkwardly, half on the driveway, half on the manicured lawn. "Is that him?" Jennifer asked, following Isabella's gaze. "That's him." A profound calm settled over Isabella. There was no fear, no anger, just a quiet curiosity. Richard emerged from his car. He looked like a man who had been sleeping in cheap motels and eating fast food for 3 weeks. His designer suit was wrinkled, his usually perfect hair was unkempt, and he had the desperate, haunted look of someone who had run out of options. Isabella opened the front door before he could ring the bell. "Richard." "Isabella." His voice was hoarse. He looked past her into the beautiful house, taking in the elegant furnishings, the fresh flowers, the obvious comfort and prosperity. I made a mistake," he stammered. "A huge mistake. I was confused, overwhelmed by your illness, and I made some terrible choices." "You made choices based on who you really are, Richard," Isabella replied calmly. "That's not confusion. That's clarity." "No, you don't understand. Kayla, she's gone. She left me. She said she needed time. But I found out she's already dating someone else. Some guy with a trust fund." His voice cracked. "She never loved me, Isabella. She was just using me for what she thought I had." "I know." The simple, 2-word acknowledgments seemed to hit Richard like a physical blow. He stared at her, finally understanding the depth of his own foolishness. "Isabella, please," he begged, his pride completely gone. "I know I don't deserve it, But I'm asking for another chance. We could go to counseling. We could work things out. Work what out? Isabella's voice remained perfectly gentle. You told me you were in love with another woman. You said our marriage made you feel dead. You demanded a divorce. I simply gave you exactly what you asked for. I was wrong. I was an idiot. No, Isabella said, and her voice was not unkind. You were honest. For the first time in a long time. You were completely honest about what you wanted. She looked at this man she had once loved, this person she had defended to her dying father, and she felt nothing but a distant, quiet pity. Our marriage was built on a lie. Richard, you thought you were marrying into a comfortable life, and when that seemed uncertain, you found someone who you thought could provide a more exciting one. Now that you know the money is real and secure, you want back in. Isabella's smile was sad, but final. That's not love. That's just accounting. Isabella, I'm about to be homeless, he whispered. His desperation laid bare. I can't afford rent in this city. I don't have anywhere to go. That's unfortunate, Isabella said softly, but it's no longer my problem to solve. He stared at her for a long moment, finally seeing that the weak, accommodating woman he had married was gone forever, replaced by the woman she was always meant to be. This is who you really are, isn't it? He said, a bitter resentment creeping into his voice. Cold. Calculating. No, Richard, she replied, a final, serene smile gracing her lips. This is who I've always been. I just stopped hiding it to make you comfortable. After he left, spinning his tires on her gravel driveway in a final, pathetic show of anger, Jennifer poured them both another glass of champagne. How do you feel? She asked. Isabella looked around her beautiful home, breathed in the sweet scent of her father's roses, and smiled. Free, she said. Completely and wonderfully free. 6 months later, Isabella was thriving. Her health was excellent, her investments were growing, and her life was filled with good friends, quiet hobbies, and the simple, profound peace of living authentically. She occasionally heard news of Richard. He was living in a grim studio apartment in North Hollywood, commuting an hour and a half each way to a job he now hated. Kayla, her reputation in Los Angeles ruined, had moved back home with her parents in Arizona. They were footnotes in a chapter of her life that was now firmly closed. One crisp October afternoon, a year after her ordeal began, Isabella was leaving the grocery store when she saw him. Richard was getting out of a battered old Honda Civic, his face puffy and gray, his clothes rumpled. Their eyes met across the parking lot. He saw her healthy, radiant, calmly loading groceries into her modest but reliable car. She saw him a man diminished by his own greed and poor choices. He gave a small, awkward wave. She gave a polite, distant nod in return, the kind one gives to a stranger. Then she got in her car and drove home. She drove home to the house her father had built, to the garden that was now thriving under her care, to the quiet, peaceful life she had built for herself. The heart monitor that had once marked the rhythm of her captivity was a distant memory, replaced by the steady, strong beat of a woman who had finally, truly, come home to herself. And that, Isabella thought as she pulled into her driveway, was the only victory that had ever really mattered.